It happens every weekend. Millions of people rush through traffic, wrestle children into car seats, and slide into a pew. They check their wrists, the watch reads 3:59 p.m., they breathe a sigh of relief. They made it. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody talks about. According to the strict interpretation of centuries-old ecclesiastical law, that person might as well have stayed home. The Catholic Church operates on a set of rules that can feel archaic, confusing, and sometimes totally arbitrary. And one of the most specific, debated, and time-sensitive rules in the entire canon hinges on a single solitary minute. The difference between 3:59 p.m. and 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon isn't just 60 seconds. It is the legal boundary between fulfilling a holy obligation and failing it. Today, we are not just reading a rule book. We are going to deconstruct the architecture of time itself. We need to understand why the Church claims ownership over the clock, how a massive global war forced a change in theology, and why a practice rooted in ancient desert tribes dictates exactly when you can walk into a building in the suburbs today. This is the story of the 4 p.m. paradox. Let's start with the cold, hard legality. Does going to Mass on Saturday actually count for Sunday? The answer is yes, but it comes with a massive asterisk. The 1983 Code of Canon Law, the governing document of the Universal Church, lays it out in Canon 1248. It states, "You satisfy the obligation by attending Mass either on the feast day itself or in the evening of the preceding day." Stop right there. Look at that phrase, "in the evening." This is where the theology meets the lawyer. What is evening? Is it sunset? Is it when you finish dinner? Is it 6 p.m.? If you live in Alaska in the summer, does evening never come? The Church realized that you cannot base universal salvation on the position of the sun. It needed a hard number. It needed a definition that worked in Rome, in New York, and in Tokyo equally. For decades, theologians argued about this. But the consensus, born from a specific mid-20th century decree, landed on 4 p.m., That is the magic hour. That is the earliest possible moment a Mass can legally flip the switch from Saturday to Sunday. If a priest starts Mass at 2 p.m. for a wedding, that's a Saturday Mass. It doesn't count. But cross that invisible line at 4 p.m. and liturgically you have traveled into the future. But why? Why do we even have the ability to celebrate Sunday on a Saturday? To answer that, we have to leave the modern world completely. We have to strip away the digital clocks and the calendars and go back to the ancient Near East. We think of a day as starting at midnight. The clock strikes 12 and the date changes. That is a Roman and later modern invention. But the Jewish people, the ancestors of the Christian faith, measured time biologically, not mechanically. For them, the day didn't begin when you woke up. It began when the world went dark. Go back to the very first chapter of Genesis, the creation of the universe. The text doesn't say morning and evening. It says, "And there was evening, and there was morning the first day." The darkness precedes the light. The rest precedes the work. This concept is called Erev. The Sabbath, the holiest day of the week, began the moment the sun dipped below the horizon on Friday. This is crucial. For Jesus and the apostles, the rhythm of holiness was nocturnal. The Sabbath started at twilight. You can see the urgency of this in the Gospels. When Jesus is crucified on Good Friday, the disciples are in a panic to get his body off the cross and into the tomb. Why? Because the sun was setting. The Sabbath was crashing down on them, and all work had to stop. The early Christians inherited this DNA. They were Jewish. They kept the Sabbath rest on Saturday, but then, As the sun set and the first day of the week, Sunday, technically began, they lit their lamps. They gathered in homes. They celebrated the resurrection in the dark. These weren't 45-minute services. These were vigils. The word vigil comes from the Latin vigilia. It means to watch, to stay awake while the world sleeps. It implies danger, anticipation, and guard duty. The greatest of these was the Easter Vigil, where the church sat in darkness all night, waiting for the spark of the resurrection. This established a fundamental theological principle. The church's greatest feasts always begin the night before. But as history marched on, we lost this. As the church became the dominant power in Europe, the rhythm shifted. The Roman method of timekeeping took over. For over 1,000 years, the Sunday obligation meant Sunday morning, period. The idea of an evening mass became taboo. In fact, for centuries, there was a law that mass couldn't be celebrated past noon. The logic was tied to fasting. You had to fast from midnight until communion. If mass was at 5 p.m., nobody would ever eat. So, the evening mass died out. The vigil became just a word for a day of fasting before a feast, not a liturgy itself. For 1,500 years, the pattern was locked. Sunday morning was the only option. It would take a global catastrophe to break the lock. Enter the 20th century, World War II. The world was on fire. The pastoral reality of Europe was shattered. You had air raids, blackouts, curfews. You had soldiers moving in the night and factory workers pulling 18-hour shifts to build tanks and planes. The rigid rule of Sunday morning only was suddenly cutting people off from the sacraments. Bishops began asking the Vatican for permission to hold evening masses, not because it was trendy, but because people were dying without the Eucharist. This crisis planted a seed. After the war, the Industrial Revolution shifted into overdrive. The 9 to 5 wasn't standard anymore. Nurses, police officers, shift workers, modern life was eating Sunday morning alive. The church had to face a hard reality: adhere to a medieval schedule and lose the people, or adapt the schedule to save the souls. The turning point was the 6th of January 1953. Pope Pius XII, a man often viewed as a stern traditionalist, did something radical. He issued the document Christus Dominus. While largely about fasting, hidden inside was the key that unlocked the weekend. He gave bishops the power to permit evening masses, but they needed a guardrail. If you allow evening mass, when does evening start? 1 p.m.? That's barely after lunch. The Vatican needed a time that felt substantial, a time that respected the ancient Jewish tradition of sunset but worked on a modern mechanical clock. Rule 6 of the document laid it down. The Mass shall not begin before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There it is, the 4 p.m. rule. It wasn't random. It was a calculated compromise between the position of the sun and the schedule of the modern worker. It was late enough to cast long shadows to feel like the evening of the ancients, but early enough to allow families to get home for dinner. This exploded after Vatican II in the 1960 seconds. The Council pushed for full, conscious, and active participation. They took the door Pius XII unlocked and kicked it wide open. The Saturday Vigil became a standard feature of Catholic life in America. It was codified into the 1983 canon law. But this brings us back to the warning. Is the Church just being pedantic about 3 to 59 verses 4? The 4 p.m. rule serves as a temporal border. It is a warning against laziness. The Church is saying, we are giving you this flexibility, but do not abuse it. The Saturday evening Mass is not a loophole. It is not designed so you can get church out of the way to watch football on Sunday. Theologically, when you step into a church at 4 p.m. on Saturday, you are entering a different time zone. You are entering the vigil. You are supposed to be in a state of anticipation. The readings are for Sunday. The prayers are for Sunday. You are celebrating the resurrection before the rest of the world has woken up to it. This is why that 1 minute matters. If a bishop allows a Mass at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., without explicit permission from Rome, which is incredibly rare, that Mass breaks the connection to the ancient concept of evening. It ceases to be a vigil and becomes just a convenient religious service. So, the next time you are rushing to that Saturday Mass, and you slide into the pew as the clock ticks over to 4 p.m., realize what is happening. You aren't just checking a box on a weekly to-do list. You are participating in a rhythm that goes back to the darkness of the tomb and the lighting of the first lamps in the catacombs. You are keeping watch. The Church set the time at 4 p.m. not to restrict you, but to orient you. It's a reminder that even in our modern, electric 24/7 world, we still answer to the rhythm of the sunset.